We are live. Hi, everyone. Welcome, Eastern European Machine Learning Summer School. Great to be here. Hope you've had a wonderful week, and we are really excited to have you here today. Of course, we are here today to talk about AI for social good, and we're going to have a conversation about what it is that AI for social good is, thinking about mitigating harms from machine learning, and what we can do to encourage more work in general areas of AI for social good. So my name is Shakir Mohamed. I'm a research scientist at DeepMind in London, and I also do a lot of work around social impact questions in healthcare and environment, and particularly a lot of work around community engagement. But of course, today we are here to speak to Yoshua Bengio. I think he needs no introduction from all of us. He's a professor of computer science and operations research at the University of Montreal, which is how most of us will know him, and a founder of the Montreal Institute for Learning Algorithms. Of course, one of the biggest things that we celebrated in the last few years is that in 2019, Yoshua received the ACM AM Turing Award, the Nobel Prize of Computing, along with some of our other luminaries of the field, Geoffrey Hinton and Jan LeCun. He's also a co-founder and a member of the board for the International Conference on Learning Representations, and I'm very proud to be able to serve with Yoshua as a member of that board. And also where I first met Yoshua was when I was a postdoc in a program for CIFAR, and Yoshua it was then called, what was it then called? Neural Computation and Adaptive Perception. And
exactly, NCAP.
NCAP, and now the program is called Learning in Brains and Machines, and Yoshua is the director of that CIFAR program. Yoshua's research is to uncover the principles giving rise to intelligence through learning, as well as favor the development of AI for the benefit of all. So welcome, Yoshua.
Thanks, great, very nice words. And thanks also for your own involvement in all these questions.
So I'm just going to give everyone a quick overview of the format. We're going to spend just around an hour or so talking about all questions of AI for social good. I've looked at a lot of your questions from the Slido, and so they will be worked in. I may mention some of your names, and I'll continue to look at the Slido as we are speaking. And then we're just going to take it from there. So let's get started. So maybe just as an opening question, Yoshua, how is Yoshua the person, not the Turing Award winner, not the famous machine learner? How is Yoshua, the everyday person like us, doing right now in this time of lockdown? What kind of coping strategies are you using? How are you handling in this new phase of living and life that we are currently going through?
I don't know if I'm doing that well. I'm working a lot more than I was before the pandemic for some crazy reason. I have meetings back to back, and I feel like I don't have time to breathe as much as I used to for some reason. And I guess I miss, like everyone, talking to people in person, going out, and so on. So I guess it has been a motivation for me to get involved in projects that can potentially do something against COVID-19. And I think we should all take these opportunities to think about what we can do, even in small ways, to bring about a better world. And so when something like this happens that touches all of us, it's easy, but sometimes the danger is more remote, like climate change.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we all need just to think of those strategies. And we'll pick up on this question of the social impacts for COVID a bit later. So today we wanted to have a broader discussion around AI for social good. Maybe you could just give us your thoughts around what good in this phrasing of social good might mean, and to you, and maybe other definitions that you've seen that are particularly useful or interesting for us to think about.
Well, that is a question that philosophers have been debating. What is a good life? What does it mean to be virtuous? What does it mean to do good? What is public good? What is common good? And I don't think that there is one answer, but that's okay, because we can all have our own views on what it means, if we're ready to engage in a discussion with others about that, and listen and learn about the suffering about others. So one of the simple thing is, what's going to be the consequences of our actions and the consequences in terms of well-being and suffering for human beings. So that's a very, very simple philosophy, which also can be used to guide your choices. Like if I'm going to choose to work on project A or project B, what might be the impact? And it could be negative, or it could be, for some people, like who might be hurt by this if it's misused, or it might be positive. Like maybe I'm working on some new antiviral. What could be the impact? So you also have to multiply this by the probability that it succeeds, of course. Yeah, these kind of calculations are hard to make, but you can use your intuition and reflect on the possibilities and talk with others about it, because different people have different opinions on this, and that's fine.
Okay, so if I summarize, then a kind of definition that you're working around good is one that considers consequences of actions, that is thinking about well-being and suffering both at the same time, thinking of impacts, considering misuses, recognizing positive effects, and is always ultimately about this kind of reflection and considering with others. So I think that's a really broad definition. So are there
because I just want to add to this, humility is super important here, because no one has the definition of what is, good and moral behavior and so on. And so we have to be willing to engage with others and learn and read. So read philosophy. I mean, this is like the number one question of philosophy. It's really interesting. And I mean, part of the question about AI for social good is we have to be more than some sort of math expert or machine learning expert. It forces us to be more complete human beings, where we are also members of our community, members of the human race, and we can, it can really be positive to think of us in this way and make us better people.
Absolutely. So are there kinds of applications that you think are particularly well suited that fit in this particular definition of good and social good and AI for social good that we've just been talking about?
I mean, the usual things, health, environment, social justice, education, actually, there are a lot of smart people who have been thinking about this. And although I might not agree with all the details of what's been done, but the UN has put out SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. I think there's 17 of these, which try to answer your question, and give us at least a number of options where we can do good.
Yeah, I think the SDGs are such an interesting kind of topic, because for many of us, if we want to think about, we're going to start with that question of what are important questions to work on. When we look at the SDGs, you already can start a little bit up the ladder. You don't need to start by first convincing people that some questions are important questions. They've already been agreed by every country on the planet to sort of that these are important questions. So I think that's, I really love the framework of the SDGs, and particularly the kind of measures that come from them.
Yeah.
So if we're now going to think about, let's say, picking up on the SDGs, SDG number 3 is the one on health, SDG number 10 on climate action. What are the kind of important aspects that you think we would need to do to drive successful social impact research and successful applications in that sense? And maybe we touched on some of this in the definition.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to humility here. We come with our expertise in machine learning. And we are naive in other areas of knowledge, and especially like social sciences and philosophy and economics, justice, law, and so there's a lot of social sciences and humanities that we have very little training in, and so we have to be willing to learn, engage with people who have more expertise, and also willing to, speak our mind when we disagree with them, but mostly start from a point of view of a learning person, a student of the things we don't know about, and sometimes admit that we make the wrong choices and start over. And it's okay.
I feel like there's a story of disagreement in the back of your mind. Is there a story of something you disagreed on recently that you think you could share with us?
Yeah, so I've been involved in a project regarding COVID-19, which created a lot of debate in Canada. And I was proposing to use machine learning, and a lot of social scientists actually opposed any kind of digital tracing. And the funny thing is, like, I felt like, but like, I'm all for the values you're talking about. I'm against Big Brother. I'm against anything that's going to threaten human dignity. But it felt like it was difficult to have a constructive public discussion about this. And the funny thing about democracy is sometimes the rational public debate doesn't happen the way it should. And it's just about fears and emotions, and governments tend to be very conservative, and they don't care about the facts. They care about being reelected. Mm-hmm. And so if something is controversial, they don't go there.
Yeah, especially in such times, and we are in crisis, and decision-making under crisis is something I think we are all trying to learn about for the first time, at least for me. And so you can just imagine, and this question, I think of maybe constructive dialogue with the public. Let's come to this one a little bit later. I think there's so much to talk about there.
It's tough.
So Tomek Vekshe, he asked the following question: what advice would you give to beginner ML researchers who want to shape their research careers around AI for social good? And I think there's so much hiding in that question. So maybe you can that a little bit for us.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to say that my heart has been warmed by the number of students that I've talked to at Mila and elsewhere who genuinely want to do something to help, but I mean, to help in the sense of using their expertise for the common good, and sometimes being concerned as well as how AI could be abused, a tool for power by larger companies and countries and so on. But at the same time, a lot of what I hear is, but we are afraid for our careers that if we engage in something like this, it's not going to be valued as much as having 5 NeurIPS, ICML, iClear publications in the course of our PhD. And that is very sad. I feel like there's a lot of pressure of social pressure and psychological pressure on grad students to publish or perish, and not just to publish or perish, but also publish in a particular way. Like there's a food chain of like, if you're doing theory, you're like at the top of the chain. If you're doing like new algorithms, you're also kind of at the top of the chain. But if you're doing applications, you are like a lowly being. You're not smart enough to do like the really tough stuff. And that is really sad because, first of all, that all of these things are important, and applications can have positive impact in the world, and so they are super important. So yeah, I wish things were different. The publish or perish kind of culture that we have currently, where we go from one conference event to the next, is really hurtful, not just for AI for social good, but in general for the quality of our research. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I think it's a bigger problem. And then to go back to the motivations, the way that I've, my personal emotional take on this, and I think others probably have felt the same based on what they told me, is there's something about dedicating some of your effort. It doesn't have to be 100%, to these socially beneficial endeavors, which makes you feel good, right? So in philosophy, right, there's the question of what is it mean to do good, or to be good, or to be having a good life, and part of the message of the original thinkers like Socrates and Buddha and so on is that it's not just that it's good because it is like the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do, and it makes you better, feel better, be happier, and feel good about yourself. So I remember some of the decisions I took in my life where the way the decision happened was I imagined myself 30 years later looking back on my life and thinking about my decisions, and then retrospectively thinking, if I had taken choice A versus choice B, how would I feel about my life, right? And I found that exercise extremely useful, because in the short term, we may feel like, oh, this is going to be better for the recognition of my peers, or I feel like, this is going to be better for my CV. But if you ask the question, how will you feel, a few decades later about your own choices, it's a very different way of thinking about those decisions. And usually it leads you to the right decisions, to the right, to what is just, to what is better for the group, for society, for others.
This you're touching on maybe a topic of time scales, and maybe we could just linger just a little bit here. One of the challenges of doing work of AI for social good is the time scale of that research will be on the span of 2 years to 3 years, not the span of 3 months to 6 months. Yeah. And do you have a strategy where you are managing that kind of time scale of decision making in the span of decades for ourselves personally, but then time scale of our individual research? And I feel that's maybe one barrier that we are facing, that how is it that we can help people navigate managing these different, sometimes conflicting timescales, particularly if you are doing a degree and your degree is ending and you don't have 2 years to do that kind of work.
Yeah. So I think there's a simple answer to this. If you don't have a lot of time, or you want to do something in the short term, consider existing projects. Right. So of course, if you start from scratch, a particular endeavor where you would like to see it reach its fruition and have an impact in the world, even 2 or 3 years is probably not enough.
Yeah.
But there are lots of other people who work on AI for social good, and they have collected data sets. They have thought about how a particular application could be useful. You don't have to redo all these things if you join these projects, and they need help. They need manpower. They need people to try things. So one of the things I got involved in a few years ago was the idea of this AI Commons, which was basically to try to help exactly students in that situation would think, oh, I'd like to do something good, but I'm not an expert in so many other things. Could I work on a data set which, instead of working on ImageNet, I'm going to work on this COVID-19 data set, and maybe I could do something good with that. And so it's not going to change necessarily your routine that much, but you're going to start to have to read a bit more than usual. So I think that's a good path to create institutions, logistics, and ways for people to work together, to meet, to share data, to share projects, to share a partial work, so that we can facilitate how individuals can just help in their limited capacity and limited time, and facilitate the collaboration of people who come from different horizons. This is always very difficult, by the way. And I don't think we have the right infrastructure for this right now, and we should strive for more of that.
So yeah, I was really hoping
the Climate AI website and organization is also an example where we're trying to make it easy for people to see what is going on, join existing projects, get in touch with each other, and so on.
So that was climatechange.ai. Maybe just the last question on this topic is I was really hoping you were going to talk about AI Commons and in general about the thing that we can do is to reduce the barrier to entry to these kind of projects. And as you rightly said, the last missing, after we have addressed questions of timescales, after we have addressed questions of reducing the barrier of legal data and the kinds of problems, there's still the problem of collaborators. Because you yourself don't know, and you said exactly. Can you just maybe say a little bit more about finding good collaborators, embedding yourself, especially if you are feeling nervous, unsure about working, saying the wrong kinds of things? I don't know, how have you done this in the past, maybe particularly with the COVID project? You just jump in and be like, I don't know anything about epidemiology, I can learn.
So you first of all, again, you have to go back to humility, that you really have to learn a lot from others who know better. So I in the last 4 months, I learned a whole lot about epidemiology. It was an amazing experience. I talked to people, of course, who are experts, professors, and grad students who knew a lot more than I did. But at the same time, I know stuff about computers and machine learning that they don't. And so it was a fruitful exchange and a productive one. So you have to start by reaching out, going to these websites, talking to people, send email, many emails, find the right match. Don't try to reinvent the wheel yourself. Okay, that is the biggest mistake. So many of us maybe have a exaggerated sense of our own worth.
Yes.
And including myself. I mean, it's hard, especially when you get a Turing Award, not to feel like this. So you have to fight it. And as a machine learning expert, we are like a rare species that the world needs. And so we might feel really strong that we can solve any problem. But actually, we really need the help of others who know better in various areas. And so if we don't do that, it's just going to be a big failure.
I'm so glad you brought up this point of ego, particularly because when you ask people to work on projects that are already there, this is one of the reactions which come up. This is such valuable advice. So thank you for saying that and sharing that with us. I thought maybe we could move on. So we just spent about 15 minutes, actually longer, 20 minutes, talking about social good. Maybe we could talk a bit about social harms instead. We can actually talk about good without talking about the harms that's possible. What tools do you think, what tools do you use to think about harms from machine learning? And, especially those that are applied in social settings. How is it that you're navigating what is harmful, potentially harmful, and then trying to mitigate those harms in the long run?
The
short run.
I guess it's just like the other thing. So in both cases, you have to be willing to listen to people who have a different kind of expertise. So here it would be more in the social sciences. Whereas my other example was, for example, with epidemiologists. And that means reading stuff that you're not, familiar with, and maybe you might find sometimes shocking or disturbing. What else? So let me. I guess I'm not going to really answer this, but let me share my philosophy regarding harm. I mean, it's not my philosophy. Let me share what is my biggest concern regarding harm, like the way that I summarize my fear. In fact, it's my biggest fear about AI, right? AI is a tool. And of course, I mean, it's a set of tools. We're building up these tools, machine learning, so on. And humans have been making tools for, since basically being a human means making tools. And maybe 100,000 years ago, our tools were some kind of sharp nut, a sharp rock or something. And the worst we could do was, kill a few people if we got crazy. But as we build more powerful tools, crazy people can do more and more damage. And as we build also organizations like big countries and big companies, we also making it possible for the people in power of controlling these organizations to have a bigger impact, right? So this is what wars really are about. So long as the wars use arrows and knives, again, the damage can't be that bad. But if they have nuclear weapons, you can see that it can degenerate and become really, really dangerous for a lot of people. And so that's my concern with AI. We're building one of the most powerful tools that humanity ever had. And when you have tools that are powerful, you need wisdom to be able to use them properly, right? Because of course you can do good things with AI, but they could be misused. They could, and especially, so the thing that I'm most afraid of is that powerful tools can increase the spiral of concentration of power, right? Mm. So the people who have power might be tempted, if they don't have the right values, to use those new tools to enhance their power, like in the military or in surveillance of their people. And so one interesting question that I remember seeing discussed is, what if the Nazis or the Stalin, during the Stalin years, these political organizations had access to current machine learning tools for surveillance and Big Brother, and it's scary. And it's actually, you don't need to go 60 years in the past. This is something that may be happening, not in a country not too far from yours. So
yeah,
this is very scary, and it's just the beginning, because clearly we're continuing to make progress in AI. So I think there are like little harms and there are bigger harms, but there's like a pattern to how powerful tools could be misused to increase the power of those who already have some, or grab power thanks to those tools. And what are the solutions? So the solutions are not easy, right? The solutions require both individuals to become wiser, mm-hmm. and societies to become wiser. So social institutions, democratic institutions and so on, international governance institutions, so that we can avoid the worst disasters that may come out, both politically, or in the case of climate, for the planet, or suffering on millions of people that could come from these tools. And so there's this phrase that I like very much, the wisdom race. There's a kind of race between, we're making progress collectively and individually in terms of wisdom. I think we are. I'm a believer of progress, but at the same time, we're creating all these more and more powerful tools and institutions, like I said, like big companies, countries, and so on, with concentration of power. And concentration of power plus powerful tools is a bad mix that we should be wary of.
I wonder if I could just keep you talking a little bit about this. You used an expression here. You said, when there's the concentration of power,
yeah.
You said, if they don't have the right values. And I wonder
my values, of course.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you think of the set of values that you are using to reason? And maybe this is going back again to the question, humility is one of those values. Yeah, but in the general set of values, how are you thinking about this question of right values? And also maybe, the follow-up of that is, I think the whole crisis right now, particularly around the global cooperation around COVID and also climate change, shows us that we are not able to build these kind of wise international cooperative organizations and solutions. In fact, we're going to do the opposite. So how can we reform power in this sense? So values and the reform of power. Words to share with us.
Well, values, again, it goes back to philosophy and basic virtues. But so the question is, I want to go back to the direction we should aim to, with respect to this wisdom race, to try to answer your question. So here's an image which has stuck in my mind, and hopefully can stuck in other people's minds. Think of the tools we're building as nuclear bombs that are potentially very easy to use. Like a child could play with it and detonate it. So how do we prevent a catastrophic occurrence to come up, right? And the only solution I can find, like, first of all, it's going to be very hard to prevent, guarantee completely something bad to happen. So the only reasonable solution I can think of requires every human being to be treated fairly, to receive, education, healthcare, justice, and so that we can avoid this sort of anger that can come from social justice or brutality or whatever trauma that can make human beings become really bad. I don't think that, I think that to increase the total wisdom, we basically have to look at the worse off in society to make sure that they are going to be well treated. And we don't do a good job at that right now. I mean, it's obvious within some countries like the US where there's a huge inequities, but it's also terrible at the level of, between countries. And so whatever we can do that's going to help with that is going to also help us prevent the sort of catastrophic use of these powerful tools. So in other words, this kind of social equity and justice is a prerequisite to minimize the potential huge damage that may come. And that's going to need, it's going to need, so think about difficult conflicts that haven't been solved between different ethnic groups. I don't know, I'm thinking a lot about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict because of my Jewish origins. And it really saddens me to see how, the potential for listening and understanding the other as a human being has failed in this case. Mm-hmm. And that's what we have to go back to, right? So humanizing, we have to make sure that every human being is considered as such, that the worst thing that can happen is dehumanize others. Because if we do, then they can be abused, and there's no personal moral cost for that.
Yeah, I think this is such a powerful message, and you see it in so many books in Hannah Arendt's work, is that when people were not considering what was going on, then evil could become every day. It was the banality was just going on that way. And I think this idea of wisdom and justice, that we must look at the margins of our society and that risk must be fairly distributed. It must not live only with the people at the edge. I think is such a powerful point. I wanted to maybe just go now a little bit more specific to come back to our specific community here.
Yes.
So a question.
I got carried away, sorry.
No, this is exactly where we should have gone. So if we center that question of power, particularly in relation to Eastern Europe, our organizers are thinking of the following. What advice can we give to countries and regions affected by brain drain? And this is the case in Eastern Europe, but in many other regions. Lots of researchers originate in Eastern Europe. We have seen our entire organizing committee. They now live elsewhere, in Canada, here in London, in the US. They leave the educated systems, and their own regions remain underrepresented, underdeveloped.
Right.
I don't know if you've had any thoughts.
Yes, I did. So, I mean, not specifically about Eastern Europe, but I can share a bit of a parallel experience, which is different. Canada used to be suffering very, very serious brain drain to the US. In particular, I was witnessing that in my area. Like, I was seeing my grad students, when they graduate, they take a job in the US, whether it's in industry or in academia, or, the prestige was there. And that was kind of saddening. And so, if we look at what happened in the last decade, the wind has turned around, but it hasn't turned just by itself. So I and others have been lobbying the government to create local locally sort of internationally recognized local institutions that would have the means to attract the best researchers and keep them. And this, both at the level of universities. So we created these institutes like Mila and Vector in Toronto and AMI in Edmonton. And in terms of the industrial ecosystem, so startups and companies, encouraging them to invest in AI. And the pitch was very simple. Like if you look at the economic projections of the value of AI in the next 10 years or so, it's humongous, right? It's dozens of trillions of dollars worth, at the global level. And the question is, where's the profit for that going to go, right? So right now, if we just let things go their sort of natural path, it's going to concentrate, because concentration of power is sort of the thing that happens by default if you don't do anything against it. It's going to concentrate probably in the US and China, right? But there are other options. So as we've shown in Canada, it is possible to create from nothing an ecosystem of companies and university centers that actually become sort of a sustainable ecosystem where people graduate and they want to stay here. And I think it can happen in other countries as well. Now, it's going to take political will. It's going to take the ear of some politicians who understand that they actually have a chance to build something. Of course, it's not like, I don't think like most countries can aspire to become the world leaders in this, but they can at least build their own economic strength, because there's always value in having local companies who understand the local culture, understand the local needs, and have the tools to bring something. And then they can export. Like in today's environment, the good technological advances in any niche area can very quickly become global products that can make a lot of money. And so I think it's a very wise investment for governments. So what it takes, the government will, but it also takes some local entrepreneurs and local scientists, academics who are willing to invest a bit of time to do the lobbying, to do the organizational work, to create institutions, to start companies. It doesn't come like for free. You have to work, but it can work.
So I think hopefully everyone was listening to that, and we can convince everyone in the Eastern European community to come together, maybe in some form of coordinated bodies to do some of these kind of work, and hopefully they can reach out to you and get some more wisdom and specific advice, because it is very hard. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but we also have a lot of allies all across the world to support in these kind of endeavors. Maybe in the last point in this section on harm, machine learning these days is now what used to be a very obscure field, is now the field scrutinized by international organizations, by large companies, by universities creating entire strategies around this kind of field. And we are now intersecting with almost every other field of science and security. I wanted just to get some of your thoughts on the harms that comes out from machine learning when we relate them to questions of privacy, human rights, and a bit more around open democracy. And you spoke a little bit about this, but I thought maybe we could talk a little bit more. If you have any thoughts to share with us on these intersections of machine learning and privacy, rights, and democracy.
Yeah. So I think in my recent work on the COVID-19 digital tracing, really gave me a strong lesson in privacy. So prior to 2020, I have only vague, knowledge of what people in privacy were doing, and even more vague notions of the culture there, which is obsessed with protecting, against leaks of information. One bit is too much. And so I learned a bit by interacting with those people, and it's interesting because it also created challenges at a scientific level, in the sense of there's a tension between machine learning and privacy, right? So privacy wants you to have no data.
Exactly.
And machine learning wants to have more data, right? And the tension is always like a creative opportunity, because you can find better compromises if you think through this. And so, yeah, I'm very excited about some of the things we've done that try to bypass, like, how do you manage, like, among all the privacy choices, there are some that allow machine learning to do better. And then among all the machine learning approaches, there are some that are going to be more compatible with the privacy constraints. So this is like a difficult matching problem. Going back to the democratic aspect, another thing I learned more about is, and maybe I learned it the hard way, is that when you create an application of machine learning, you have to really learn and think through and discuss with experts regarding the social impact. It doesn't come like necessarily spontaneously. It's something that comes out of discussions with people who have thought about these questions for a long time. So, for example, in the digital tracing scenario, the question of human dignity came central. So in my initial thoughts, I was just focusing on the health. I said, like my first thought, hey, you could have a device that beeps when you're close to somebody who is infected, so you could stay away from that person. Oh, wait, but what about the other person who's infected? How are they going to feel about this?
Yeah.
So now you have to trade off not just privacy, but dignity. So now machine learning is in sort of tension also with this question of how do we protect people's dignity?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to trade off some accuracy or information, and so that results in losses in terms of protecting health, right? So having to deal with all these trade-offs is an amazing experience that again forces into humility, and so the worst thing that could happen would be, oh, I know what to do, I'm going to write my code, build the application,
put it on GitHub, and then
put it out on GitHub, okay? And then right, so that is really bad, right? You don't want to do that. You want to start discussion with people who have the mind to think about these questions, and then start the exchange, realize that you didn't think about some things, and try to find solutions, and so on. So that's for dignity. And then there's the democracy, the democratic question, which has been painful for me and kind of I feel bruised. But yeah, I mean, the democratic debate doesn't always work. So we went out in the media talking about our thing, our proposal for using machine learning for digital tracing. And so, a lot of people were super excited and so on, but there are also like a lot of people who were very concerned and aggressive in a public way, including intellectuals. And in a way, well, that is, how at least currently our democratic debates happen. Mm-hmm. So first of all, some of the mistakes we made is wait too much before going out and start the public discussion. Yeah. You have to engage in the public discussion as early as possible, and you can do it. I mean, you can start by doing private discussions with people who might not agree with your ideas. And that has been, working very well, because they feel you're giving them the chance to participate in the solution. Whereas if you come out and say, okay, so this is the thing we're proposing, yes, no, it's not a good place, right? Yeah. The good place is inclusive. So in other words, you start with, well, here's some ideas. We could go this way, that way. What do you think? What are your preferences? Like, what concerns you? and then we can adjust, right? We can navigate the space of solutions together.
I think, yeah, it talks in so many different, I think the point you just brought about the trade-offs is maybe another almost more important motivation of why we need more people to work in these spaces, because we as a field are not going to have the muscle, the experience to know how we trade off different kinds of value systems when we're doing it in practice. And unless we start doing it, we'll never build that kind of experience. So I think there's a really powerful lesson that you just shared with us there. And also the question of privacy also just dawned on me the other day, how machine learning in some sense redefines the notion of consent. Because exactly what you said, if I give you consent for data, if I don't give you my consent, but if you have given consent, well, I can learn from your data. So my consent somehow is less meaningful. And so there's just this whole interesting space of privacy, consent, democracy, all these amazing things that you, and the bruising.
But notice that for me to have learned these things has required that I get my hands in dirty. And if I had stayed in my little machine learning institute and not be involved with others outside my field, I would never have learned all these things. So you have to actually get involved in projects to be able to learn those things. Reading, if I had read the things that I'm saying in a book, it probably just would have.
Exactly. So yeah, you need to have that kind of direct experience. I thought maybe we could jump to some of the audience questions in the time that we have. So I have maybe 3 different sections, a bit more around Eastern European machine learning community, and then we can talk a bit about research questions and research advice. So there were several different questions, again, from the organizers, but many other people who wanted to have some advice from you around students who are contemplating the idea of doing a PhD in machine learning in AI.
Yeah.
The question, we spoke a little bit about this. Should they target famous labs, whatever famous means in this case? Should they do a PhD at all? And particularly, I think this is the right concern that people are raising. What advice do you give to people who are in less famous labs to attract PhD students? Again, maybe they're brain drained. And I'll read out the rest of the question. How can researchers or entire labs that are doing research in deep learning but happen to be in less represented areas or less known universities proactively increase their visibility? So there's a lot going on there. So pick whichever part that you...
I don't know. These are hard questions. So let's see what comes to mind. I would say one of the powerful tools that people in less recognized groups or labs could use is collaboration with people who are in those places. And one of the ways to start such collaborations is internships. So I have had a tradition to take interns for many decades, but in the last few years, I don't know, 5 years or so, I've tried to concentrate, an effort in recruiting people from those less well-known places, from the underdeveloped countries and underrepresented groups. And I think I'm not the only one to do this kind of thing. So I think there is room to gain some foot in those famous places, universities, industrial labs that do research. They hire interns, and of course there's a bias, right? So if you're looking at the CVs, oh, this guy comes from Stanford undergrad, he's probably better than this guy from University XYZ I've never heard of. But still, I can tell you that a number of students from less recognized places do make it, and they create connections with the people there. They go back to their place. They become professors. They have long-lasting collaborations sometimes. So it's a powerful engine to disseminate expertise and so on. So that's one thing. Also, I think you need to develop a sense of local pride. Yeah, I mean, that at least has worked for us in Montreal. I mean, you have to, because there's a natural local pride. Like if you take people from a particular city or a particular country, it's built in. Like they feel good about their whatever identity group, which can have also negative consequences, but that's another story.
Yeah.
But you can play on the positive side of this, because they will be motivated to create things locally, to contribute to projects locally, to come back from, to take jobs locally, for example. So I'm thinking about something like Hugo La Rochelle, for example, who is one of my former students, and he had, very good jobs. He could have stayed in the US, and he decided to start a Google Research Lab in Montreal and fight for it, and he got it. And so, that was one of the good ingredients that allowed the local ecosystem to grow. So every time a person thinks about, oh, I want to do something good for my community, it can help. But having people who sort of shake that brand, increase this local pride, it has to be part of the discourse. And I think I'm pretty sure that in Eastern Europe, there are such feelings, and you can tap into them to make these gestures happen more often.
And I think this Eastern European machine learning community is exactly that form, where we have a project across all of Eastern Europe, in Poland, in Romania, and many other countries. I think such a good lesson. Maybe this is a very good, because the follow-up question which came up, and maybe relates to the question of the advice you gave us earlier around creating those centers and the parallel with Canada's growth. Someone writes here, given the current landscape of research centers like Mila, like the Stanfords, like any of the others we were just talking about, in what direction should an Eastern European center focus on, so that it can become a relevant or principal center on that topic in several years? So they are thinking on this long game, but maybe a focus area where you become the owner of that thing. So you are so valuable that you must be in that.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice, wisdom?
Yeah. So again, I'm going to draw parallels, but one of the reasons for the success of Mila initially, okay, so the initial stage, before it was known, is we created a talent concentration in a very specific field, which at the time did almost not exist. Okay, like deep learning. 15 years ago, okay, so imagine yourself 15 years ago. In fact, publishing in neural nets was hard and so on. The point is, we went against the usual wisdom in universities of having a diverse group of research areas covering everything, sort of.
Yeah.
And we decided to create a concentration instead, of having like 3-4 professors working on the same thing, sharing grad students, and then becoming known as a center in the world for this very pointy thing at the time. Now, of course, we were lucky, and it turned out deep learning worked really well, but of course we didn't know. The point is, and it's also true about a PhD, by the way, like if you want to be known as a PhD student and you work on like 6 different things that have nothing to do with each other during your PhD, it's not as likely. I mean, you're going to get more papers out of it, but if you really want to make a strong mark, or let me put it differently. The strong contributions often come from people who concentrate on something and become the world expert on that thing. And to become the world expert on something, you have to focus on it, right? If you're just like a tourist trying to take low-hanging fruit in some area and publish a paper, you get papers, but you don't become the world expert in something, right? So you want as a PhD student, you want to become the world expert on something, and as a group who wants to get visibility, you want to become the reference for something. It can be very niche. That's okay. and then it might grow, but you have to become recognized for at least one area where you're going to be cited for that. People are going to, oh, this university, they are the guys who do X.
Yeah. And I suppose once you do it the first time, it becomes easy to reproduce the second time, or you can then expand it over time and cover more areas. And then,
of course, yeah. Nowadays, Mila is very diversified, and it's kind of covering the usual machine learning areas.
But when you begin, so I think that's really good. I want to maybe push back on that thought, though.
Okay.
We read that paper. There's this amazing paper I love reading, and I share it with everyone, which is called Birds and Frogs. And it's by Freeman Dyson. It's one of the things you study in philosophy of science. And he will describe great mathematicians throughout the age. And he will say that actually we have two kinds of scientists. We have the scientists type that you described, who are the frogs. They look at the reads, they focus very deeply, and they know their field to such an extent. But at the other side, you have the birds who survey the field, who can see between disparate things. And I think the point he makes is that no field of science can ever be successful if you only have one.
Yes. No, I totally agree. I didn't mean that we shouldn't have the birds. I'm saying that the frogs are the ones which can
start the engine.
Yeah, start the engine in terms of international recognition.
Agreed.
And I myself have I'm part frog, part bird. I've been touching so many areas of machine learning, and now of outside machine learning. So I feel sometimes a lot like a bird and not having time to concentrate on anything.
I have
but that also comes with seniority. I mean, it's like a natural process. So that's why I was taking the example of the grad student. So I think you start your life as a frog, and normally you become a bird as you go older.
That's a really good advice. Okay, the top voted question was, for you, it's a very personal question now. How do you come up with so many ingenious ideas? What is your thought process? What are the prerequisites? A similar question came up from Piotr Januszewski. He asks, how do you divide your time? What major activities could you point to about how you divide your time? And people are very precise. What percentage of your time what percentage of your time are you writing drafts and notes? What percentage of your time are you ruminating? What percentage of your time are coding? Amazingly, in this set, there's no percentage of time around organization or management. Maybe that's a thing for us when we get a bit older. And another question which came up in the very same vein, how many new research papers do you read per week? What is the average time you spend reading a single paper? So people really want to get into the mind of Yoshua to see what is a day or a week in the life of Yoshua as a scientist.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure that I'm an example to follow, first of all. I don't read enough. Like, I feel so frustrated not having time to read as much as I would like. So I have become really good at reading super fast a paper. Like, I read the abstract and I look at the figures and either, I think, oh yeah, okay, I understand, done, or, oh, I'm not interested, done. And then 1% of the time I actually read the whole thing and then look at the appendix and so on. So that's very efficient. But, sometimes I also miss a lot of things that, later somebody tells me, oh, you didn't read that paper. Yeah, I thought I did. No, I had missed like a really important idea, because sometimes people don't write well. And that's a lesson as well. Like, you have to write for people like me who don't have time to read and are just going to skim the paper, the intro, the figures, so that the big messages are super clear. Okay, so going back to my time and how do I get all these ideas? There's an activity that you didn't mention: sleeping and dreaming.
Yes.
So I try to sleep 8 hours per night, and well, usually at least 7. And when I wake up, I try to not start working right away. Like, I try to keep thinking about things, eyes closed. And it's a very creative moment. And I also like to walk. And so you have to give yourself these moments where you're not forced to solve a particular problem, to read something. So this ruminating aspect, I think you mentioned, yeah, that's super important. If you don't have that in your life, you're not going to be very creative, or it's going to be very superficial. Like, because so here's the thing about ideas: you have to marinate them. Like, I mean, they have to marinate in your mind, and it can take days, weeks, months, years. But the same obsessive thing comes back, and you think, oh, there's something there. I need to find a solution to this problem, or it is, and so you have to pay attention to your own thoughts. Write them down. Have a journal.
We all have a drawer next to us.
Okay, so here's another trick, but unfortunately, it's not easy to reproduce. But some people have it. It's self-confidence. It's pretty sad, actually, because I know a lot of very smart people who are lacking self-confidence, and they don't even let themselves express the good ideas that they have, because they immediately think it must be bad.
Yeah.
So okay, it's hard for you to improve your own self-confidence, but you can help the self-confidence of others.
Yes. And that goes back to just being human in the world and treating others with that kind of respect and giving people that real thing.
So one of my biggest job as a supervisor is not to provide new ideas to students. It's to provide them with confidence and encouragement and trust that they have a safe place to express their own ideas. So I try to do that. I'm sure I could do better, but yeah, this is important.
So how does one get to apply for a PhD with you in your lab? What are some of the main attributes you are looking for in a PhD student or prospective student?
I don't know. I guess there's a lot of intuition going on. So I read CVs, and then I select some people that look interesting, and then I interview them. And during the interview, I try to get a sense of their creativity. I ask them questions to see if they're comfortable a little bit outside of their usual areas of knowledge. And also, I try to see if in the areas where they're supposed to have worked, if their understanding is superficial or deep, right? Like, have they thought about why, this is a reasonable thing to do? Where does this formula come from if they do a bit of math? And of course, there's a lot of randomness here. Sometimes they're unlucky, and I ask them a question and they don't know anything about it. But the way that you answer questions also teaches about the psychological aspect. So I don't want to take students who are going to be a pain for me from a relational point of view. I also value the human sort of the emotional intelligence, as they say.
Yeah, that connection of people. Okay, maybe one kind of research question, and before we wrap up, several people asked this question: what are the specific topics in deep learning, statistics, machine learning that you think are significant breakthroughs in the next 5 years? And Michal asked a very similar question: what is the biggest challenge in deep learning at the moment, I guess with the intent that it becomes a big thing, and what topics would you expect to be the hottest in the next few years?
All right, so I'm first going to discard everything I'm going to say next by saying, in science, we need diversity of sort of research directions. And it is good that every researcher sees a different answer to your question, because otherwise we would all do the same thing, and the exploration, because research is an exploration, would fail. So we really need that diversity of thought. Now, so any researcher who feels sufficiently free to choose their path is just going to go with their gut, what they believe is the right way forward. And so I can only tell you watch my last 5 talks online about system 2, consciousness, out of distribution generalization, agency, causality. So I'm like super excited about this direction. All of these are connected to each other in a very interesting way. And I think we can go from the current deep learning, which is very good at low-level perception, to an extended deep learning, which I call deep learning 2.0, which is able to tackle the problems that good old-fashioned AI was trying to tackle, of reasoning, of causal understanding, of being able to imagine counterfactuals, and of being able to reuse pieces of knowledge dynamically so you can face new situations efficiently without requiring millions of examples.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great summary of many other questions which asked about your opinion on graphical models, other ways of augmenting neural networks, long-term memory, questions about consciousness, definitions of intelligence, solutions to intelligence. Everyone, please watch the last 5 videos. There was a very good talk at iClear. You can find it online. So maybe we'll just bring it back to a close, Yoshua, as a final thought.
Yeah.
If there's one message you want everyone who's listening to this conversation to walk away with, what would that be?
In science and in your personal choices, take the time to listen to your gut, to your emotions, to your inner voice, and just go for the right thing rather than what others would like you to do.
Yeah, I think that's such great. Listen to your gut, your inner voice, part of that self-confidence which guides you to the right thing. Are there any, just as materials or resources for everyone, organizations, other research groups, a book maybe, or a resource that you would recommend that people look up or reach out to when they go back home at the end of this?
Well, so of all the things I contributed a little bit to in the AI for social good, I would say the organization which is in best shape right now is the climate.ai. It's a super important topic, among others, but I think the website and the organizations with all the workshops we're doing is incredibly well done, and it could be also a model for other areas of AI for social good. So I encourage you to look at that.
Yeah, there's a really comprehensive paper that really does this mapping of machine learning, shows this collaboration with other people. I think it is a great model. So as a final thought, final thoughts. In the times of crisis that we are in, what gives you hope?
I guess I believe in humanity. Like I believe that we have something good in us. I'm not a cynic. When I encounter somebody or another human being, my first assumption is that the person has good faith, and even if I disagree with them, I assume the best in people. And where this comes from, in my case, I don't know, my personality, my upbringing, I don't know, but it really helps to have a positive outlook on our future and our work. Like it helps really to take risk because we think that good things can happen. Of course, you shouldn't wear pink glasses because there are dangers. I mean, we've been talking about the harm, so we have to be mindful of all of these things. But there's this very interesting machine learning result, right? That in order to be successful at exploration, you need to have a little bit of optimism. Like you have to do mu plus sigma, not mu minus sigma. And that allows you to find better things if you assume the best, and then that will encourage you to explore more. And it's true in human relations, it's true in research.
Professor Yoshua Bengio, on behalf of the Eastern European machine learning community, thank you for your wisdom, your guidance, your advice. We really appreciate all the time that you've given us today. We hope we can get in touch with you. We hope you and your family are safe, please, and hopefully see you in person soon, somewhere,
Thanks very much, Shakir, for the amazing discussion.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.